Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix podcast with myself and
Meek.
Tom Meek. Actually, James Junkin is taking a week off this week for some personal items. He'll be back next week. We wish him well in taking care of what he needs to take care of. He's surely missed, of course. But here we are, Risk Matrix, episode 99. 100 next week. We're going to have some special things going on next week, some special giveaways, and stay tuned for that. All of you know that we're powered by Veriforce. Just want to give a shout out that we're going to be with Veriforce at the Veriforce booth at ASSP coming up this summer. So make sure you check that booth out. I know James will be there to chat you up and some of the other Veriforce folks. So thank you, Veriforce, for powering us and for sponsoring us as we go forward into our 100th episode. But let's focus on number 99 today. I've got Tom Meek with me. Tom Meek joined Veriforce in 2016. He brings 30 years. That makes you old, Tom. I'm sorry. 30 years of pipeline operations, safety training, and regulatory compliance in the role of Vice President of Regulatory Compliance. What we're going to talk about today with Tom is OQ, Operator Qualification. And I'm not an expert in Operator Qualification, and that's why we got Tom here. As far as I know, and this is what I Googled, Operator Qualification is a program mandated by the U.S. Department of Transportation for pipeline operators, requiring them to ensure individuals performing covered tasks on pipelines are adequately trained and qualified to prevent accidents and ensure pipeline safety. That's the nutshell right there. But Tom is going to tell us what that means. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I appreciate it. And best wishes to James. And,
we're going to bring him back next week, and he's going to be full of it for sure. I'm positive. And just, for James, roll Tide. So Tom, tell us a little bit more than what I said. I know you have 30 years of pipeline operations, et cetera, but what is your full background? I know you sit on some committees and a bunch of other stuff. Could you let our listeners know what that entails?
You bet. I'm proud to say that I actually started off in pipeline operations working for pipeline operators, and started off as a compressor mechanic and went through the different grades and got into management, and later on technical training and onto the regulatory side. And that all started prior to the OQ rule coming out. And quite simply, operator qualification is a complex topic, but if you think of it as what do pipelines do? Pipelines are a method to transport gas and oil and hazardous materials. And so actually at the core of it, it's a transportation business. And if you want to learn about who regulates the transportation business, if you think about over-the-road trucking, for example, the Department of Transportation regulates that, and that also regulates the oil and gas transmission business. And as such, they have a branch that administers operator qualification, and it's called, the acronym is PHMSA, which is Pipeline Hazardous Material Safety Administration. And so it's a transportation business that regulates the pipelines. And how it all came about, as you can imagine, through the years, there were various incidents and accidents, and the alphabet soup of government and private organizations that investigated these incidents, like the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, discovered that a lot of the incidents were due to human error, go figure. And the human error could actually be traced back to the lack of training and the lack of qualification. And so October of 2002, the operator qualification rule went into effect. And what it basically says is anybody that's involved in the transportation of these materials that are doing operations and maintenance work on a pipeline, it makes sense to reduce the impact on people, property, and the environment to have trained, qualified people. And so it was a negotiated rule where it was wide open, and so that's the reason why there's so much interpretation. But the goal or the purpose of it was to make sure that the people that are doing the hands-on work on the pipeline facilities and the pipeline are actually trained and qualified.
Okay, so I have a note here and I want you to tell me if this note is true, right?
Sure.
So you said 2002, right? That's when the kind of the OQ kind of came, it was the advent of OQ came in.
Mhm.
I have a note here that says it's largely been unchanged for the last 20 years, OQ and how it works and what it requires, et cetera. And that the focus now is on how operators implement and own their programs. It's not a
That,
one size fits all mandate. What does that mean?
um, yeah, that's very true. The only significant change that's actually happened occurred in 2004, where they came out and said work performance history isn't a sole method of qualifying. You can't say, well, just because somebody's currently doing the task, they are qualified. They still have to go through being evaluated and qualified. But the one size fits all idea, uh, which is a fallacy, and I see this quite a bit. There's a lot of confusion around it. Actually, comes from the four-part test, what they call a four-part test to determine whether the work being performed is a DOT OQ, what they call covered task. And the four-part test, quite simply, is in the regulations. And what you ask yourself as a pipeline operator is this, first of all, performed on the pipeline facility? So for example, if you're doing work on a regulator or a relief valve or any kind of valve piece of equipment on the pipeline, that's the number one indicator that it could be a covered task. Now you take that same valve off-site to a shop and you're working on it, you don't have to have that qualification in place because you're not on a pipeline facility or pipeline. The second part of it is, and this is, in my opinion, the reason for such variance. The task should be part of the operator's operations and maintenance procedures. And so the holy grail actually would be to have everybody have the same operations and maintenance procedures. But the reason that there's a variance is because each operator prefers different brands and types of equipment. Each operator has different environmental concerns, like what you would do in New Hampshire in the middle of January is something different than you would do.
We stay inside, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you there, but yes, we do
No,
stay
good
inside
call.
of, I do anyway.
That's right. And just like if you're doing that same work in Phoenix, Arizona, in the middle of summer, you might stay inside as well, right? And so
Right.
so there's different operations and maintenance in different facilities, different equipment. And for that reason, you will see a variance in not only the number of tasks that an operator has, but also what those tasks look like. And Veriforce allows for that flexibility in hybrid. It's not an off-the-shelf program. It should start right off with the operator's concerns. The other part of it is it part of the regulation? Then it should be a task. And then also, does it affect the operations and integrity of the pipeline? And so once you run through that four-part test, you could, as an operator, have a totally unique task list. And where we see the rub is when an inspector comes in and compares your task list perhaps to your peers. There might be an obvious gap where you are doing something that should be a task that you haven't identified, or it might simply be a case of, hey, we have a unique operation and we don't do that piece of work. We don't do any offshore work. We don't do anything that would fit in January in New Hampshire. We don't do that kind of thing.
Yep.
And so your task list is going to look different. We've talked about, there hasn't really been any significant changes. The one big change that could have happened around 2016, they had a notice of proposed rulemaking where they were going to make things a little more stricter, or a little more clarity around it, prescriptive, if you will. For example, around training, or perhaps tightening up what the four-part test is for identifying a task. And because of a change in administration, all of that was set back and never went through and never got restarted again. However, the trend that we're seeing with some of the states is that they are becoming more restrictive. The federal code is the baseline of what you absolutely have to have. However, states have the flexibility to impose stricter regulations. And so what you see, some of the states are going to a 2 or 3-part test where they're really focusing on just, hey, does it affect safety, operations, or integrity of the pipeline? And so it gives them more flexibility to add more covered tasks into their purview.
So you're speaking my language, right? When you say flexibility and not one size fits all, the listeners are gonna know this is coming. It just depends, right? It just depends.
Yes.
And so since it just depends, right? Can we just kind of roll back a little bit to that 4-part test again and kind of dumb it down for myself at least? What is the dumbed down version of the 4-part test?
The dumbed down version of the 4-part test is if the work is being performed on the pipeline and something bad could happen, that person should probably be qualified on it.
Okay.
And it's not just the 4-part test helps narrow down the list somewhat. Each operator has policies and procedures, what they call an operations and maintenance manual. And within that policy and procedure manual, there's a paint by numbers, so to speak, acceptable way to perform the work. And so when you see a description of that work, that naturally lends itself to being not just a job, but a particular task. For example, valve maintenance. And so if you really dumb it down and think of it in terms of safety, that if somebody was working on a piece of equipment or the pipeline, and if something went wrong, would it affect the integrity of the pipeline? Could something bad happen where you put people, property, or the environment in danger? And just from, an overall view of it, if the answer is yes, then it's probably a task.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dig a little deeper here, right? We've got the regulations, right, which are usually, it sounds like, have been pretty static over the years, with the exception of a few things. Let's talk a little bit about compliance versus competency and how you strike the right balance between regulatory requirements and how competency will drive safety and performance in an OQ situation.
Yeah, I think what you're driving at is how are things being implemented? So you can strictly follow the rules and still not be doing the right thing. And so you have to take ownership as pipeline operator as to, everybody probably has a rule book. For example, I'll use over the road stuff like everybody knows the speed limit is 55 miles an hour because it's posted, right? But how are you actually implementing that? Are you driving 3 miles over the speed limit? What are you actually doing? And so by actually looking where the rubber meets the road and seeing how you're implementing your training, how you're implementing your qualifications, what your procedures look like, how are people in the field actually performing the work, and can you get better? Can you continuously improve? And so you can follow the regulations, but not be fully engaged to know what is actually going on. Are the people actually driving 55 miles an hour? Yeah, everybody knows the rules, but let's see what happens when you get a general contractor and 5 subs out on the job, and let's see what's happening.
I've never in my life gone 3 miles over the speed limit. You could take that however you want to take it. I've never in my life gone 3 miles over the speed limit. So tell me a little bit more about, because I know you've been doing this more than 30 years, right? And you sit on some of the standards making or rules making situations that we have. And you do this for Veriforce full time, right? You're the OQ guy. What does Veriforce, or does Veriforce have a method to the madness that they help people get through OQ competency and compliance? What do those things look like, and what can be expected in the form of helping people improve?
Absolutely. So let me tell you about one of the fun committees that I'm on. I belong to ASME's B31Q committee, which is Association of Mechanical Engineers. And early on, because this was a negotiated rule and it wasn't so prescriptive, everyone in the industry, regulators, state, federal regulators, pipeline operators, contractors, were trying to figure out, quite honestly, how to comply with the rule. And so a committee was formed to help with the qualification of individuals and come up with some kind of standard method of establishing a program, establishing tasks, establishing what constitutes training and when is it necessary, and all of these things. And so back in the day, they gathered like 600 SMEs to go through and hash out what tasks were and come up with.
And everybody agreed, right?
Well, there was a lot of cussing and discussing, right? And yeah, I have seen some heated discussions only because people are passionate about safety. But yeah, and so through the years that has evolved, and so API and ASME have qualification standards and suggestions as to how to build an OQ program, what a task list looks like, what an evaluation looks like, and all of these things. And so you have industry consensus because you have people who are not representing the company they're working for, but representing industry, bringing in a roundtable of all of these ideas. I'm very proud to say that I was one of the initial clients of Veriforce when operator qualification came out. And one thing that we had a hard time coming to grips with is we could manage our internal employees and their training and keep track of their qualifications, but we had a difficult time keeping those historical records, which are required to be kept for at least 5 years after the performance of the task. And so we brought in Veriforce, but to my amazement, they had what they called a steering committee. And what that was, all of their clients came in as operators and actually formed an industry committee where you have input from all of your peers, and everyone's doing things different, but you know, there are good suggestions and different ways. And so over the years, that saw has gotten sharper and sharper, because when you have 250 clients going through inspections and audits every day at the state and federal level, you have their internal SMEs honing those tasks. You have a wealth of knowledge, like Sandra Cass says, none of us are as smart as all of us. And so when you have the industry like API and committees like ASME B30Q, 31Q, and then I'm proud to say Veriforce is an industry standard as well, because we have all of these folks meeting on a quarterly basis where you can ask questions of your peers. You can get industry and regulatory updates. It's a shared wealth of information to perhaps bring you from someone that's just new to OQ up to having a solid program.
So along those lines, as part of being on those committees and obviously working for Veriforce, is it the exploration of methods to assess and verify the qualifications through performance evaluations? Because you mentioned prescriptive methods, right? Mm-hmm. But performance is a whole different bailiwick, right? And I would think that some of the operators that aren't as savvy would benefit from the whole, if you know, want to look at the whole of 600 or 700 clients.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, it does appear to be a moving target. And even though it hasn't changed over the years, you do get notices from the federal government, PHMSA, on some of the findings and some of the updates. And they also share kind of directions through FAQs. And so I'm going to say a couple of things here, especially if you're new to operator qualification, that will really, you should really hang on to this thing. Because when you're an operator, you can contract the work, but you cannot contract the regulatory responsibility. And so regardless of who's working for you, you assume the risk because it is your OQ program and they're qualifying under your prescribed method of qualifying. And so the contractor, yes, they are responsible, but at the end of the day, who's going to assume most of the risk of that? That will be the operator. And so it's incumbent on all of us, including contractors, to qualify in a consistent way. The second thing that I want to say, which is remarkable compared to other industries, is that training does not equal qualification. You can train forever, very much like a driver's license, until you take that practical test where you sit down in front of an evaluator or proctor and prove that you can follow the rules of the road and not drive on that given day over 3 miles an hour, the speed limit.
Like me.
Yeah, and in parallel park, so I'm out on that.
Yeah.
but until you can demonstrate your knowledge, skills, and abilities, you are not qualified. And so qualification is the end game. Training is a means to the end, but it doesn't give you any kind of qualifications. And
It's
so
just a small piece, right? It's not everything.
exactly. And so it's mind-boggling to think that perhaps the person that invented the equipment that's on the pipeline, they're not qualified to go out and perform the work until they are evaluated in front of a person that knows what they're doing and can make that assessment as to whether you have the right knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform that task. Yeah.
So let me go here with this. What I'm hearing you say, and you can tell me if I'm hearing this wrong, is everybody's different, right? I mean, pretty much how they get to OQ is there are regulations, but how they get there and how they demonstrate their compliance is different. So that being said, how does a operator codify and demonstrate that they've done their due diligence to the regulations? And I don't know if I'm saying this right, but how do they document it and prove it such that if they were audited, I'm assuming there's some type of audit procedure too, if something happens or whatever, how do they demonstrate to the regulators that they have complied with the spirit of the regulations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Within the regulations, there are some kind of table stakes kind of things that you have to do. That the other thing, I said two things. The third thing that you want to remember is there's no grace period for complying with the law. And so day one of operations, you have to have qualified people in order to do the work. You can't say, well, we're working on our OQ program and we'll get there someday. And oh, by the way, we just bought this other company and those folks are not qualified yet. So,
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we just had a major release, but we're working on it.
Yeah. Sorry about that hospital and the school, but
yeah. Well,
yeah. So there are table stakes kind of things where you have to have a written program, and Veriforce and even PHMSA has an outline of what a basic program looks like. But the real rub is all of the other things that you have to figure out how to do. For example, how do I put evaluators in place to qualify my internal people? How do I track my qualified contractors? And then it in the regulatory world, just like a lot of other worlds, it didn't happen unless it was documented. And so in a very short period of time, it becomes overwhelming, not only to maintain your current documentation, but verify the people walking out on the job site, getting out of the trucks are qualified prior to performing the work. And then if you think about how transient some projects and contractors are, they might only be on your job site for 2 weeks, but performing regulatory work. The real kicker is 4 years from now, when the federal inspector comes into your shop and says, hey, let me take a look at that project that went on that only lasted 2 weeks. Oh, you've got these 10 people. Show me their qualifications. Well, they're gone. I don't have their qualifications. And they reach out sometimes to the contractor, and the contractor says, well, I had that in an Excel spreadsheet in my desk, but that's gone, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And so the documentation, the continuous improvement, meeting the minimum requirements are just the baseline for getting started. And so it's really important to call on experts like Veriforce, so that you can continuously improve and you don't miss any of these steps. You don't miss anything that's critical. Even,
yeah,
for example, something that's really tough for folks is the management of change process. If you change your program or you change how the task is performed, are you no, think about it, the supervisors, the leads, the boots on the ground all have to receive notification. But if it's a
right.
significant change, also what has to happen is that has to go all the way up your organization and be reported to the states that you operate in and the federal government.
Yeah, I love me a good management of change document, and now I love me a good management of change document, but I also love me a good implementation of management of change. And you're right, a lot of people don't really think about that as a very essential tool in keeping things, number one, on the up and up, but also having things run smoothly, having everybody be on the same page, having updates to, I mean, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, which I wouldn't recommend, or whatever, that things are being updated in real time so that when those questions are asked, either by a regulator or a client or an owner or whatever, that you can pull that out and say, here's the method to our madness. But we also can show that we are all aware of what is going on here. And so I'm going to segue us into the digital tools, because I know that you've been instrumental in some of these digital tools of OQ for Veriforce that kind of accomplish many of these purposes. They serve many masters of management of change, documenting OQ for individuals and for companies, etc. Can you speak a little bit about what those things look like? Because when you say Excel spreadsheet, I think small company, just trying to by the seat of their pants, but eventually companies grow or
Yes.
companies need a better structure. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of things are available in that
Yes.
realm?
And it really connects the intentions of your program to the people that are actually doing the work. You're giving them tools to do that verification process without getting in the way of them doing the work. For example, there are mobile tools where you can scan somebody's identification or QR code and verify whatever a ready to go to work person looks like for your company. And so if I'm the general inspector representing the company out on the ditch, and somebody comes up and I know that they're going to be coating the pipe today, I can scan their credentials and instantly pull up whether they've met the qualification piece, or if you make training a strict requirement as an operator, do they have the training as well? And so if you think about what a ready to go to work person might look like for a company, it might be many things. Let's look first at the company level. Does that company have a drug and alcohol program? Does that company have the proper amount of insurance to be on your job site, for example? And then at an individual level, hey, we're going out to New Jersey, and at this job site, there's some particular considerations that you need to be aware of so that you don't get hurt. And so I'm going to require perhaps an orientation. And so my requirements in New Jersey for this job site would be, hey, we're going to have an orientation. You have to have qualifications, and you also have to have training. Another job site might say, you know what, it's really critical that we make sure that these folks are as individuals part of a drug and alcohol program and that they're in good standing. I don't want somebody ineligible to be on my job. And so when you scan those credentials, a ready to go to work person there is going to have the qualifications, they're going to have the training, they're going to have the orientation. And oh, by the way, because of technology, I can tell whether they're in good standing in the drug and alcohol program. And so that the tool and the technology gives you transparency as to what your requirements are and as to whether whoever internal employee or contract employee walking up on the job has the right credentials to get on the job. A real quick story, I'm full of stories, but
Please, I love stories. Is this one about Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear? Or
it
no?
actually is, because it
Okay.
was the three of them got together and they mixed up their identity. And so
Oh no.
when they showed up out on the job site, some of these tools had unintended consequences. And the unintended consequence is one of our large pipeline operators discovered there were a number of people that were not who they said they were. And not only were they not qualified to be on the job, but they were an imposter. And they, who knows what kind of intentions they had. They might have just wanted to go to work, but they were not qualified, and they were not who they said they were. And
so Goldilocks got through the gate. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And then Papa Bear, as always, had to wait outside.
I get it. I get it. So you know what strikes me is that some of the smaller operators are at a disadvantage. Like you said, they're operating on the spreadsheets and on the seat of their pants and trying to comply with the regulations. How did they build the business case to come up to speed on some of these things that either Veriforce or some other firm offers to help them get the OQ qualifications, in a robust manner that they can share, look at the data, see where they're at with their peers? How do they do the business case for that?
It's quite simple. If we look back to why the rule was put in place to begin with, it was to prevent people from getting hurt, right? Protect people from folks that were causing accidents because of human error and lack of training. And so the real risk is damage to your company reputation, but it's also the hazard of looking somebody in the eye and telling them that their loved one is not coming home today. And so if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what does. And the government takes it very serious as well. So for example, PHMSA can impose a fine. This is a business case, a fine of over $200,000 for each incident, and up to $2 million a day. And then
that's way more than my last speeding ticket.
That's right. That's right. And so if you're struggling for budget, if you're struggling to get a hold of the operator qualification program, the risk to the business, the risk of life, the risk of monetary, it's got it all. It is really a critical piece of your overall pipeline operations. The unfortunate thing is, quite often this is allocated to somebody that they just wear one of these hats, and they're not given the support and the funding to realize how serious it can be until it, heaven forbid, something's happened.
Yep. I'm gonna take this time to run to our audience here, because they actually have got some questions for you, Tom. So you ready? This is the Stump the Tom portion of our show.
I thought you were gonna call it the Stump the Chump.
Yeah, that's me though. I'm the chump. We'll say Stump the Tom. So Wendy says, being newer to the space, what would be the best qualifications to start obtaining with the most value for OQ?
As far as an individual performing work, or as far as an operator?
I'm gonna say but let's do both. Let's say individual, and then what do we start on as an operator to start that program of pulling everything together?
If you were looking for a career in the pipeline industry that's tied to regulatory, that's not going away, some of the tasks built around damage prevention would be probably a career that I would look at, or perhaps something that preserves the integrity of the pipeline, like integrity management, which is the prevention of the pipes corroding. There are pipes in the ground that have been in there since way past the 40s even, that to this day, because of corrosion preventative type applications and measures, are still as functional as the day they were put in the ground. And so two strong careers would be damage for prevention, which would be, for example, probably most of us have the common experience of seeing the little yellow and orange flags along the road or in your driveway when they're doing any digging. What that is people actually have instruments that they do utility locating with, and that would be a fantastic career. And then the encroachment of those utilities, you need trained excavators, you need trained spotters. All of that comes into play, and that's probably the most common task performed on the pipeline. But I've always felt that corrosion was not just a job, but also a career, because I see long tenured people in that aspect of pipeline that do very well for themselves.
Okay, and then on the flip side, for OQ for the company at the company level, or what is where do they start? What's item number one?
Item number one, believe it or not, when all else fails, look to the regulations and that 4-part test. A great indicator as to what your task list should look like is to start off with your policies and procedures. If you perform routine maintenance on the pipeline or the facility, it's probably described in your operations and maintenance manual. And so you can do a one-to-one match of, hey, look, we're doing valve maintenance inside of our procedures, and it tells you from point A to point B how to accomplish that. Well, guess what? You should have a task for that. Or the procedures describe your welding procedures, how welding should be performed on particular thicknesses of pipe and applications. Oh, there's a procedure for that. There probably should be a task for that. And so as an operator, like I said, you can hone and revise your task list, but from day one, you should have a pretty good overall view of what your tasks are from your own on.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap in 2 questions that we received by email, and let me see if I can weave these together in a way that make any sense. Someone on email said, what suggestions do you have for knowing that your processes are audit ready on the OQ side of the house? And here's the second part, right? What are the common mistakes that you see in OQ programs that think they're ready,
okay,
but they're not?
Beautiful. One of the most interesting jobs that I had in the pipeline is I would go in to different areas and perform mock audits. And so, you go through and check the records, and you have another set of eyes look at that. I'm proud to say that Veriforce performs those services. We do have auditors where it's not a state or federal audit. What happens in the audit is shared with the operator, and the operator has a chance to clean house before a company comes in. And so you're on the right track if you inspect what you expect. And so the trick is the implementation. Is it being implemented and documented in the way that you expect? And the only way to figure that out is to do your own audit.
Okay. And what are the common mistakes that you see people make in those types of audits?
The common mistakes are very, very few. If you look at each quarter, they're probably more often than that. Within the PHMSA website, you can actually go in and look at the notices of violations. There are very few companies that can get in trouble for having a rule book. That might be tweaked one way or the other. Hey, the speed limit on this highway is 70 miles an hour, not 55. Where people get in trouble in audits is not the program that most of the time. You have to have a written program. But where they get in trouble is the actual implementation, where Tom's driving 60 in a 55. It's the individuals not being qualified on the tasks that they're performing, or they're performing it in a hazardous way, and they're not following your procedures, and they're not following the criteria of that task. And so it does get down to human error, or it gets down to where someone is actually purposely being negligent And oh, by the way, you can go to jail for that as an individual and as a company. If you knowingly are violating the regulations, that's a crime.
Yeah. I never look at the speed my car is going. So I can say I didn't know, right? So I'm going to wrap this in because you actually mentioned this. Wendy from an earlier question says their place to see FEMSA fines issued and incidents, and you did allude to this. Where would they find that if they were looking? What would they type in?
They type in the acronym FEMSA, or write it out, and or DOT, and that will take you to the FEMSA website, or a link to the FEMSA website, and then you can look at violations and in one of the sections, and not only it's very educational in that it gives a full write-up as to what the violations were or what the concerns were. And then the other thing that is really helpful is the notices of probable violations. Like, hey, we're thinking that this is a violation, but if you have a legitimate reason for why this is, maybe that potential violation goes away. Explain to us what you are doing. And so if you read through all of those write-ups and the back and forth between the operator and the federal government, it's a pretty good learning process.
Great.
And justification for getting more funding to support an OQ team, because, hey, this company was just fined $100,000 for not having a lock on a valve. Would we like to put a little money and time into this?
Into addressing what our management of change item is going to be and how we're going to fix that, right?
Yes.
So Tom, I want to thank you for coming on today. You're clearly the OQ expert. Tom is with Veriforce. So if you need OQ help, or Tom has a team of people that he works with, I know, at Veriforce, so you can get with Tom directly. Tom, can I give out your email?
Most definitely. And
Tom.Meek.
Answer questions offline as well.
Okay, his email is tom.meek@veriforce.com. And Tom, I'm so happy you came on and spent this time with me. I learned a lot. I'm not an OQ person. I'm not a pipeline person, but I did learn a lot. So thank you for being our guest today. I want to remind people in the audience that this is our 99th episode. Thank you, Tom, for 99. And we're going on to 100 next week. Thank you to everybody who's listening. We are picking people from the audience to send Veriforce gear. So as always, chime in on our podcast, come and listen, sign up, hit the like button, hit subscribe. We've gotten some positive feedback from people who've received their gear already. Looking good, fellas. And if you want to connect with James Junkin or myself, you can find us on LinkedIn. Just type in our names and hit follow. We do both put out content, and you can find out the next things that are going on at the Risk Matrix. But next week we got $100 gift card that's out there for the getting. And tell your friends. Your mama wants you to listen to the Risk Matrix, so bring it on. And on that note, thank you for listening, and roll Tide.
Are you planning to attend ASSB Safety 2025 in Orlando this July? We'll be there July 22nd to 24th at Booth 1201. Stop by to connect with industry experts and explore smarter solutions for contractor management, compliance, and training. Don't miss James Junkin and our expert speakers tackling hot topics like procurement versus safety. Let's build safer workplaces together.